In our last episode, author Vincent Bevan spoke about the role of media in shaping the narrative of current events and how this narrative has a direct impact on political outcomes. In this day and age of instant information, it can be easy to lose sight of all of the history that has created the world we live in today. Conflicts that surge to the surface today are often the result of tensions and turmoil that have been ongoing for decades, or even centuries. In the same way, movements of resistance can be the result of enduring empathy and solidarity. South Africa's decision to bring a case against Israel at the International Court of Justice won't come as a surprise to those familiar with the country's enduring history of using the legal system as a battleground against apartheid. Nor will the portrayal of that decision by the mainstream media as merely an attempt to strengthen domestic politics. Today, award-winning South African journalist, filmmaker, and writer Sylvia Vollenhoven is with Fredrik and Leilani to talk about colonialism, controlling the narrative, and the enduring power of empathy.
I'm Fredrik Gerten, and I'm the filmmaker.
And I'm Leilani Farha, and I'm the advocate.
And the advocates I can see are sitting in some kind of hotel room in Copenhagen. Yeah, what are you doing? It's like just across the bridge here. And why are you not with us?
I know. I'm looking for you across the bridge.
Oh, you're so busy. But we had a walk Sunday in Copenhagen, and we could talk and lunch and have coffees. And
we did.
Almost like in the old days.
It was. It was very nice.
It was nice, yeah. So you're busy with your stuff, and I'm over here, and I have a visit in Malmö with an old friend. I mean, old in many different aspects, because we got to know each other the first time in 1986. It's nice. Sylvia, my friend Sylvia Vollenhoven from South Africa, legendary journalist, filmmaker, writer, playwright, and a good friend. Welcome to Pushback Talks, Sylvia.
Welcome, Sylvia.
Thank
you,
Leilani.
What a privilege, what a privilege. I've wanted to meet you for some time now. Fredrik has spoken about you to me many times, and, well, here we are.
Yeah.
And I feel I know you because I've seen Push a few times.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, one of my favorite films.
And Sylvia and I did together Josie Gold.
Yep, which I've seen.
So we've been working together, but the first time we worked together was in the 80s, and I interviewed her, and then there was a plane crash in Mozambique, or in South Africa, with the Mozambican president, Samora Machel, and the whole half of the government. And we went together. We chartered the plane together and flew up to the crash site. So we started off really intensely, and then we were at the funeral in Maputo, and where we met all the African presidents, including also Arafat was there around. So we were like just a few meters from him at the time, which makes us talk about, because you and I talk a lot about what's happening in Gaza. And of course, the South African relation to this is interesting. So that's why I think we should have a podcast with Sylvia and talk about South Africa, why South Africa is representing the Palestinians in the International Court of Justice. Isn't that something interesting, Leilani?
Everyone is talking about South Africa right now. It's so interesting. It's certainly very interesting for me, and I will admit, as someone who is deeply connected to the situation in Gaza and obviously very distraught about what's happening there and to Palestinians there and in the rest of the occupied territories, I feel this tremendous gratitude to the state of South Africa for, at least on the international stage, having a moral compass. And I wouldn't dare say whether they have a moral compass domestically. That's for you, Sylvia, to enlighten us. But as I cannot explain to you how it felt to know that South Africa was going to the International Court of Justice so that Israel would be held accountable. And then to hear those lawyers and the Minister of Foreign Affairs just speak what I consider to be truth. And I can't explain to you the feeling. So it's a huge privilege to have you on the podcast. Welcome again.
Thank you. Thanks, Fredrik. Thanks, Leilani. I've always felt pretty great about being a South African. and that's for a whole range of reasons. You know, a group of the finest legal minds going to the ICJ and achieving what they did has just added to my kind of general nationalistic pride. But coming from a background that as a journalist, as a young journalist, I was so used to South Africa being in the news for human rights abuses and for apartheid. And then turning that corner in 1994 when Mandela came to power, when Nelson Mandela came to power, and then being in the news for the opposite reasons, for finally doing something amazing. And again, in recent times, slipping back into the darkness of being in the news for government corruption, for the government failing its citizens. It has come at a time when it really lifted my morale and the morale of South Africans in general. But I think what we must remember is that it didn't come about because the ANC government sat up one morning and decided to do a magnificent thing. It came about because of a history that South Africa has with Palestine, and a history that goes even before the dawn of the new South Africa. There's always been close ties between the anti-apartheid activists and the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa and the people of Palestine.
Because when South Africa did this, suddenly it appeared in Swedish newspapers and other newspapers that it was, ANC has trouble domestically. They need to do something to get better ratings. And I thought, also in Europe, media in Canada, there was a big front page saying like South Africa is like a failed state, almost.
The day after the ICJ ruling came out, our national newspaper in Canada, the Globe and Mail, had as the front page story a big headline, and it said, "Free fall." And then it talked about the failed state of South Africa, mentioning, 27 years after the end of apartheid, as if the dismantling of apartheid was somehow part of a failed state. Really a horrendous headline the day after the ICJ ruling.
I think one should look at who owns the Globe and Mail and all those other media outlets around the world. But what the truth is that, just very quickly, without going into a long history, South Africa had two options, basically. We could go the Robert Mugabe route of Zimbabwe and then have a seriously failed state, or we could battle 400 years of colonialism and 40 years of apartheid and still keep some kind of economy intact. And what it meant was, instead of supplying roads and services and houses and electricity for 10% of the population, the government now had to supply all of that for all of South Africans. On top of which, of course, you have government corruption, and of course you have failed leadership, but you don't have an entire country that has failed. I think what you have is a country that is suffering from the ripple effects of what is happening globally, as well as endemic corruption that has become endemic in the last while. But you have to ask yourself, wherever there is huge corruption, and we're not talking just small bits of money being handed over amongst friends, you're talking billions and billions of dollars. Who is the corruptor and who is the corruptee? It's France selling South Africa helicopters they can't afford, and it's Sweden selling South Africa arms they can't afford, and it's America doing deals that have no ethics at all, and it's Germany protecting its commercial interests in an unethical way. So in the end, it's not just South Africa stealing from its citizens, it's the South African leaders being manipulated, but also I'm not painting them as helpless victims. There is a fair amount of manipulation from the big powers and big corporations. It's a global problem. It's not just a problem of this particular state. But coming back to the present, the ANC government didn't decide, oh, we have such a lot of problems at home and we're having an election this year, let's go to the ICJ. The pressure came from the ordinary people. The ANC government was not issuing any kind of statement in support of the Palestinians in the early part of this aggression in Israel. The reaction from the government and the impetus to go to the ICJ came after the biggest pro-Palestinian protests the country has ever seen.
Wow.
And Leilani, I was working a lot in South Africa in the 80s and 90s, and what was very clear at that time that the court system, the legal system was a battleground. I mean, Mandela was a lawyer, you know, and it was a part of the struggle to take things to courts, because you know, when something is published in the court, you can actually quote it as a journalist. Sylvia, you were into that.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point, is that there is a long and solid history of South Africans using the legal system to achieve even just a small measure of human rights. So just to give an example, in the old days, we couldn't quote Mandela, we couldn't quote anybody that was banned, and we couldn't state the aims of the ANC because it was a banned organization. You couldn't have rallies with freedom speeches as you would like because so much was banned and censored. But the moment anything went to the courts, you could use what was said in court as a matter of protest. So a lot of times cases came to the Supreme Court knowing that they wouldn't win and that people would still go to jail for a long time and sometimes in the old days possibly even get hanged. But knowing that the statements from the doc, the witnesses giving evidence in those cases would provide us with a way of using the court as a platform of protest. And that's a very important thing which is embedded in the South African psyche.
Yes, and I remember when post-apartheid, when you were going through constitutional reform and how galvanized the population was around what would South Africa's constitution look like, what would it include. And it is one of, at least I'm a lawyer, so I look at constitutions, I care about constitutions. It is one of the most amazing constitutions in the world to date. And that's because it absolutely incorporates social and economic rights, like rights to housing, education, health, etc., within its frame as rights that can be claimed in courts. And there's actually, there are some amazing housing cases, because of course I follow housing, the jurisprudence from South Africa on housing is really amazing and has informed, in fact, international law, which is quite incredible. But there's a direct connection also between the understanding of social and economic rights and the way they can be weaponized in an apartheid regime that has direct applicability to what's happening in Gaza and, of course, in the occupied Palestinian territories more, writ large. Absolutely. That Israel is weaponizing the planning regime, the administration of water, the bombing and demolition of homes as an act of genocide, for example. South Africa was so well positioned to understand how these things are being weaponized through an apartheid state like Israel and the damage done to the population. That, for me, it gives me chills to think that South Africa is carrying that torch, bringing it to the Palestinians.
And that's because it is the empathy with Palestine comes from a very deep place for the average South African. And, in terms of world history, apartheid was only yesterday. And what is happening in Israel is apartheid and more.
Yeah. But, I was thinking about this idea. that the media and I think, Sweden and other parts of Europe saying, oh, South Africa was doing this to bolster the ANC. And like, even if that might be crap, which I think it's crap, but even if it were true, the idea that going to the International Court of Justice to claim that what Israel's undertaking is genocide, to support the rights of Palestinians, that might galvanize a population, that is testament to South Africans, right? Because in Canada, that would not galvanize people in Canada. They'd be like, what's our government doing? And Canada's almost a Zionist state itself. So it would not curry favor with the government,
statement.
Right?
But at the same time, if South Africans were largely bourgeois, comfortable, living in the lap of luxury kind of citizens, I don't think that would have happened. But the shadow of apartheid, the impact of apartheid is still, and colonialism, is still felt very keenly. And people see very clearly the relationship, the link between their poverty and the fact that their land has been stolen. And they also see the links between what they are suffering and poor people around the world are suffering. And, it is not difficult. It is very easy, rather, for South Africans to empathize fully with Palestinians because of not just their recent history, but because of a history of hundreds of years.
I mean, you, Sylvia, also in your own life, you lived through the Group Areas Act. You told me you went to houses that people were forced to leave because, you have like closing house parties when you were young. And so you actually lived this kind of people being kicked out because they have the wrong identity.
Absolutely. When you have gone through such an intense period of being accountable to an authority that rides roughshod over your human rights without blinking, it helps you to understand how easily a state descends. And when I was born, apartheid was just beginning. And as I was growing up, it became worse and worse and worse until the 80s and the late 80s, when it was at its absolute worst. And what we can see is happening in Israel is how to defend the indefensible and to defend the level of aggression and evil, it has to become worse because the backlash against it is getting more intense. And so I can see how the Israeli state has long ago forgotten that the Palestinians are human beings with any kind of rights at all. The depth of evil that is happening there is for me very clear, and a very clear correlation with what I experienced firsthand.
Because you mentioned one word here, colonialism. I think that's interesting. And we can see now in some world, the world is getting divided. A lot of the Europeans and the North Americans are like very much supporting Israel, big time or small time. But the global South, which has this kind of experience of colonialism, are totally out protesting and pushing their governments to act. I mean, you were based in Ghana for a few years, of educating journalists. So, I mean, you also have this Pan-African perspective. How is this unfolding?
I think it's for me quite surprising to see the stark difference between what's happening in the global South and how people are reacting, because that kind of reaction of concern for the Palestinians, of empathy with what they're going through, is human. It's just normal. And then when I travel around in Europe and in North America, to see this kind of blanket support for Israel really makes me question a lot of things, and primarily the role of the media. It was so intriguing to see. I was in the US when the International Court of Justice ruling was announced, and the way the media reported it was a massive failure. South Africa's attempts had failed miserably. And then I had to really dig deep into the internet and find the exact wording of the ruling so that I could understand it for myself. And so I think what is happening in the North is, in the global North, is first of all a lot of fear, but almost uniformly huge media enterprises that have become blinkered and narrow and just lost any interest in real journalism. And, that is why podcasts like this and films, documentary films like the ones that Fredrik makes and that you have participated in is now becoming much more important in terms of informing people. Because I think if you can take a powerful nation like America, misinform them, make them so scared that they will just about do anything and collude with evil, it is terrifying for the rest of the world.
Yeah. I think this issue of North-South divide along colonialists versus the rest is fascinating right now, I have to say. I think it has become the narrative in some ways. Of course, not in mainstream media, but I don't consume it at all. But I mean, look at what happened immediately after the ICJ decision. You have Israel moving to get rid of UNRWA, the refugee works agency that supports Palestinians and really controls humanitarian aid in Gaza. And then you have all of the colonial states rallying behind the colonial state Israel. It was almost, if it wasn't so tragic and awful and genocidal, it was laughable, because it was just like these pathetic colonial states, one last grasp for power, for control, to dominate the narrative. I mean, it's been so stark. What's been revealed is so stark to me, the way in which the colonial powers are absolutely unwilling to cede their power at all.
And it's what people see around the world is this double standards, which is,
yes,
it's like a provocation, and for many people that, okay, so, I mean, I saw this documentary about the party, the rave party where Hamas came in and slaughtered young kids. Awful action, of course. But, and of course, we can mourn with them and we can be angry with them. But then what Israel has been doing ever since is like, it's even worse,
Ever since and ever before.
And ever before. So for people, I mean, in some way, I think if Israel really wanted to have our sympathy, they should have not, they should let us mourn with their youngsters, and then behave in a more civil way, or find a way to solve this situation. So now it's kind of obvious that the global South is like turning their backs now against the UK, against the Americas, maybe against Canada and Europe also. So it's fascinating to see, and I don't know how it will be not that easy to repair for the North and the West.
I think, yeah, but one has to see what has made this possible. What has made it possible to play on those divides and to divide people so easily. And if I look at, this kind of uniform support in the South for and support for Israel, for Palestine, and support for Israel in the West, mainly in Europe and North America, it just doesn't come out of the blue. If you look at mainstream media, popular entertainment, there still is this constant painting of certain people from certain parts of the world as the other not as civilized as us, the other don't believe in the same God, the other, and when you do that constantly, you've kind of dehumanized more than half of the world, and then it becomes easy to carry on what Hollywood movies, what daily newspapers, what television does as a daily diet in all of these countries, and say, we are protecting all kinds of things. We're protecting civilization. We're protecting certain kinds of standards against the horde of barbarians out there that you've seen in all your movies who are the other. And I just think this is how racism has now played itself out, because although you're not allowed to call people hateful names any longer, you can still behave in a racist manner by dividing people along these lines. And you don't even have to say black and white anymore.
Yeah. Let's go back to... sorry, Leilani. I was thinking that we should go a little bit deeper in the legal tradition of South Africa, why the lawyers are so important. You were reading for me before here like a story about Alan Boesak, the former leader, his comment about the court case.
I think what people are saying is that it's important to remember where it comes from, that it doesn't come out of the blue. And when people are just painting it as a cynical move by a small group of political leaders who are in trouble because of an upcoming election, that is also racist, because it discounts the voices of tens of thousands of people who feel strongly about these issues and who relate to the history of support for Palestine. But I think also the legal team that was put together was extremely impressive and led by Professor John Dugard, who is an international legal academic with renowned standing, and people of that kind of standing.
Yeah.
I think
Leilani.
too, it's really interesting in my work as a human rights lawyer. I mean, an advocate. I'm always trying to convince governments that there will be no human rights if people can't claim them. People need a space to claim them, and that can be courts, it can be other quasi-judicial type places, a tribunal, and it is the hardest sell in my job is the idea that in order for people to have human rights, they need to be able to claim them, because governments, of course, don't want to be held accountable. And so the tradition in South Africa, the very important tradition of using courts, is so meaningful. I mean, not just for the individual result or even the systemic result, because often the cases that go forward have broad implications, certainly in the area of housing. But there's just this even more inflated importance, which is the only way to absolutely guarantee rights is for people to be able to claim them somewhere. And knocking on a politician's door is not claiming rights, right? Having a judgment from legal experts who are judges saying X is wrong, these people's rights are being violated, is hugely important, because it's through that we then can go knock on the politician's door and say, time for change. So I love that tradition in South Africa, and most South Africans that I meet are advocates, and there's just an unabashed, of course we need courts, and of course we should be able to claim rights. And not from government officials necessarily, but certainly from the people in South Africa, the advocates just have such a clear sense this is really important. Even in my circles with advocates outside, in North America and Europe, there's a worry, a caution. We might upset governments, if we actually say that people should claim rights.
Sylvia and I made a film called Josie Gold, where we follow an environmental activist, Mariette Lieferink, who is she's into the heritage of gold mining and the environmental scandal. But she's worked closely with a legal team to use the Constitution of South Africa to go after the mining company. And she's very successful. I think it's very important to understand that South Africa has a very strong legal system and legal tradition with very skilled people working around to challenge things in courts.
Absolutely, that's such a good point. And maybe the Globe and Mail should reflect on the fact that it's a pretty good achievement for a failed state to still have such a strong legal system that can go to the ICJ and that can get the kind of ruling that they did get. And in terms of this whole notion of a failed state kind of, trying to divert attention from its domestic problems. I've just come after an extensive few weeks of working mainly in America, in the US, and then a little bit in the UK. And I must say, I am going home to my failed state very happily because I don't want to live in the US where most people are brain dead and battered over their heads by such daily propaganda of complete, absolute crap and not understanding the world at all and not even understanding their own country very well because they are so badly informed. Or in the UK, where people have to work so hard just to pay for their heating and where there are children starving and the UN has to come in and give food aid to one of the richest countries in the world. I mean, talk about diverting the world from your own problems. They do that on a daily basis, not paying attention to the elephants in their own rooms. And so I'd much rather go back to the failed state with the sunshine, even if their power goes off every 2 hours or something.
I take your point. I really like earlier you said, Sylvia, that, in the northern Western countries, we are given a daily diet of racism, pro-Zionism, and I have really felt that the brainwashing is complete in northern Western societies, and it's seeped into every institution, even the institutions where you wouldn't expect it. Like, for example, the crisis in Gaza has very much been about the siege of hospitals, yeah? The lack of medicines, bombing hospitals, killing doctors, kidnapping doctors, surgeons, etc., by the state of Israel. To me, the natural reaction in a country like Canada would be that doctors would rally and really be fighting back and saying this is, unacceptable. We don't countenance genocide and the use of hospitals in genocide. Well, that is not at all what's happened. There was a letter and some doctors signed a letter, but the actual institutions have been firing doctors and intimidating doctors if they speak out in favor of the Palestinians and trying to prevent genocide.
In Norway, it's actually been different. In Norway, the doctors and the nurses have been out supporting the doctors in Gaza. So it's not everywhere. No. Before we close this, we have to go back because you named your own country as a Zionist state. You better give us a better explanation, otherwise we'll have to take it out.
I think I just gave the explanation. In Canada, Canada is one of Israel's biggest...
What does it mean to be a Zionist state?
Yeah, so Canada is known to be one of Israel's biggest supporters. If you look at the voting at the General Assembly, Canada will be one of the only states to vote the way Israel and the United States vote. They vote as a bloc together. Zionism is accepted in the state of Canada as acceptable. And it's, as I said, it's in every institution. It's in our government that refers to Israel, even with this right-wing coalition government, as a friend of Canada. We stand behind, a friend of Israel. We stand behind Israel. We have a trade agreement with Israel. The idea of arms embargo is absolutely unacceptable. So it's in our governmental institutions. It's how we vote within the UN. But it's in every institution, Fredrik. It's in our medical industry.
We have the Oslo Accord where also the Palestinians agreed. The Palestinians are like, we accept Israel as a state. Isn't that like the part of the Oslo Agreement?
Of course. But that's not what Zionism goes beyond that. And Canada's support of Israel goes much beyond the idea of a two-state solution. Canada has had a very difficult time accepting the ICJ decision, for example. They say they do not agree with the premise of South Africa's case. What does that mean, the premise? It means they do not accept, even though the ICJ has said it's plausible genocide, the facts on the ground make it plausible that genocide's going on. Canada says we do not agree with the premise of the case. We'll wait 4 years until the case is finally decided, etc., before we accept that this is even possibly genocide, even though the ICJ has already said it, even though we say as a country we're going to follow what the ICJ says.
Okay.
Do you think at the heart of this that's got more to do with America's military presence and bases in Israel than is being said up front?
It must. I mean, the U.S. has a strategic interest in the Middle East, in oil, in gas. I mean, I assume beyond the Orientalism that you talked about, like the just straight out racism and othering, it serves strategic interests for the United States, for sure. They make a lot of money, too. Their military industry, weapons industry is making a lot of money. If you look at the stocks, I mean, I don't follow this closely because I have to follow other financial things closely, more related to housing. But if you look at the stocks going up, up, up for these arms manufacturers, yeah, this is good business.
Also, the Swedish arms manufacturers are doing really well right now. I mean, we also have the Ukraine war, so it's like wartime is good business for some.
And a regional war in the Middle East is good business, which is the path we're heading down with President Biden.
It's very sad. So that's how do we end this on a positive note? Because I know you need to go.
Well, Sylvia's going back to the sunny skies of South Africa.
Yeah.
You're all welcome when this all goes to shit.
Yes. Well, I often think, okay, I have to leave my country. Clearly, I have to leave my country. Where shall I go? And now I know it is South Africa.
Yeah. So, but it was really nice to have the two of you, two very important women in my life. So I'm happy to have you in the same podcast. And I liked you being angry together. It's like fun to witness. And so we should do this.
We should. I would like to get to know Sylvia a little bit more. I know that Sylvia has an interesting project coming up about.
No, but Sylvia wrote an amazing book, and I think we will talk about that more, because apartheid has many secrets that are still to be unfolded and understood. So this is a very interesting story. Mm. So
does that mean we're going to have Sylvia back and she'll talk about her book?
We can.
Sounds good.
We can. But I guess you have to rush into your important meetings, because that's what you do all the time, important meetings.
Well, and I'm getting kicked out of my hotel room. In fact, they're just knocking on the door.
I could see that they don't want you to stay anymore.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Leilani, and see you soon.
Thanks, Fredrik, and thank you, Sylvia. So nice to have you on our podcast.
Wonderful. Gangans. Thank you.
Pushback Talks is produced by WG Film. To support the podcast, become a patron by going to patreon.com/pushbacktalks. Follow us on social media at make_the_shift and push_the_film. Or check out our websites, maketheshift.org, pushthefilm.com, or breakingsocialfilm.com.